struggling rancher met a single mother with 5 hungry children, and turned dust into a home. Chapter 1. The Woman at the Fence. The late summer sun burned low over the western plains, and the land around Ethan Cole's ranch looked more like the bones of something dead than the soil of something living. Once, it had been beautiful, endless fields of gold waving in the wind, cattle thick in the pasture, a farmhouse full of laughter. But that was years ago. Before the drought. Before the bank notices. Before his wife passed, leaving behind a man who had forgotten what it felt like to hope. The ranch now was just dust, debt, and silence. Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, leaning on his shovel beside a half-dug fence post. The heat shimmered across the dirt road, and even his horse stood still in the shade, too tired to swat flies. The only sound was the creak of the windmill struggling to spin against the wind. Then, a faint sound broke through. A cry. High-pitched. A child's voice. Ethan straightened and looked toward the road. A small, battered wagon approached slowly, pulled by a thin gray mare whose ribs showed with every step. The wheels wobbled on the uneven path, and behind the reins sat a woman, a young widow by the look of her, with 5 children huddled close against her. Their clothes were patched, their faces dusty, but what struck Ethan most were their eyes, tired, hungry, and too quiet for children. When the wagon stopped near the fence, the woman climbed down carefully, holding her youngest child in her arms. Her bonnet hid most of her face, but Ethan saw the weariness in her posture. "Afternoon, ma'am," he called, brushing dirt from his hands. "You lost." The woman shook her head. Her voice was calm, though strained. "No, sir. Just out of places to go." Ethan stepped closer, curiosity softening into concern. "You headed somewhere particular?" She looked up, meeting his gaze. Her eyes were the color of storm clouds. "West," she said simply. "Far as we can get." Her name, he learned, was Clara Bennett. Her husband had died in a coal mine back east, leaving her penniless and with 5 mouths to feed. She'd sold what little they owned and set out in search of work, following rumors of towns where widows could find a place to start over. But the towns had been unkind, and the journey long. The horse was failing. The children were starving. Ethan glanced toward the horizon. There wasn't a soul for miles. No inn, no town, just empty plains and his worn-out ranch. He cleared his throat. "There's a barn down that hill," he said. "You and the young uns can rest there for the night. Plenty of straw, dry roof. Ain't much, but it's safe." Clara hesitated. "We don't have money for rent." He gave a small shake of his head. "Didn't say anything about rent." Her lips trembled slightly, but she nodded, eyes glistening. "Thank you, Mr. Cole." That evening, as the orange sky faded into purple, Ethan sat on his porch listening to laughter he hadn't heard in years, the laughter of children. He told himself it was just one night. Just kindness, not charity. But when he saw Clara's children curled together in the barn hay, and Clara herself sitting awake beside them, humming softly, something in his chest twisted. He hadn't realized how lonely silence had become until it was broken. The next morning, Ethan rose early to tend the cattle and found Clara already awake. She was at the well, pulling water while her eldest boy helped carry buckets. Her sleeves were rolled, her hair falling loose from its bun. Despite the exhaustion on her face, she moved with quiet determination. "You don't need to do that," Ethan said. Clara glanced over her shoulder. "It's only fair," she replied. "You gave us shelter." By midday, she'd cooked breakfast, cornmeal cakes and eggs from the coop. The children sat in a neat line, saying grace before eating. Ethan, passing by, stopped at the sight. He hadn't seen prayer on this land since his wife died. Over the next few days, the widow and her children became part of the ranch's rhythm. The boys helped mend the fence and gather wood. The girls collected eggs and swept the porch. Clara washed clothes in the creek, humming as she worked, her voice soft but full of something that felt like hope. And somehow, that hope began to spread. The air around the house didn't feel so hollow anymore. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Ethan returned from town, tired and grim. The bank had sent another notice, a final one. If he didn't pay by harvest, the ranch would be gone. Clara found him sitting on the porch, letter in hand. "Bad news?" she asked. He nodded, staring at the horizon. "Same as always. I'm out of time." Clara looked down, twisting her apron in her fingers. "You've worked so hard." "Hard don't mean much when the land's dead," Ethan said bitterly. "Guess the world don't care how much you fight." She was silent for a moment, then said quietly, "The world may not care, but people can. Sometimes we just need to believe again, Mr. Cole." Ethan met her eyes, surprised at the quiet strength there. And for the first time in years, he smiled, just a small, weary smile, but real. From that night on, something changed between them. They shared quiet meals, gentle laughter, and stories of lost dreams. When Clara smiled, Ethan found himself wanting to keep that smile safe. When he smiled, she found her heart remembering warmth. Turning dust into a home. Autumn came without rain. The grass stayed brown, the sky cloudless. But the ranch no longer felt empty. Clara had planted a garden behind the house, stubborn patches of green sprouting from dry earth. The children had turned old barrels into troughs and found wild seeds along the road. Every small bloom felt like defiance against despair. One morning, Ethan caught sight of Clara hanging laundry, her youngest on her hip. The wind lifted her hair, sunlight soft on her face. For a moment, he just watched, silent, grateful, and afraid of how much he needed that sight. He approached slowly. "You've done more for this place in a few weeks than I've done in years." Clara smiled faintly. "You gave us a roof. We're just trying to repay that kindness." Ethan's gaze lingered. "You've given more than you know." Their eyes met, and though no words were spoken, both felt the same unspoken truth. This wasn't charity anymore. It was belonging. But good things have a way of being tested. One afternoon, a horse and carriage appeared, stirring a trail of dust. The man who stepped out was Mr. Haver, the town banker, tall, neat, and cold as marble. He handed Ethan a folded notice. "You've been given time enough," Haver said. "If the debt isn't paid by month's end, the ranch will be auctioned." Ethan's throat tightened. "And where exactly am I supposed to find that kind of money?" "That's not my concern." The banker tipped his hat and left, leaving silence and despair behind. Clara stood nearby, clutching her hands. "Ethan," she began softly, "we'll find a way." He turned away. "Clara, I can't take more from you and those kids." She stepped closer, voice trembling but firm. "You gave us life when we had nothing. Let us help." He wanted to refuse, but her words broke through the wall he'd built around himself. "You really believe we can save this place?" "I believe in you," she said simply. That night, they made plans by lantern light. Clara wrote letters to neighboring farms, offering sewing, cooking, and milk deliveries. The older boys helped Ethan repair the barn roof. The girls gathered eggs and baked bread to sell in town. Even little Tommy stood proudly beside a sign that read, "Fresh eggs, 2 cents." The work was endless, dawn to dusk, hands bleeding, backs aching, but for the first time in years, Ethan felt alive. And every night, when Clara sang to her children, he stood outside the window, listening with a heart too full for words. Weeks passed. Coins began to pile slowly in a tin jar. Not enough yet, but something. Then came the storm, not of rain, but of wind and fire. A lightning strike hit the far pasture, setting the dry grass ablaze. Ethan and the boys raced to fight it, but the flames spread fast. The barn caught fire, and smoke filled the night. Clara ran into the chaos, pulling the youngest children away. "Ethan!" she shouted. "I've got it!" he yelled back, but when the roof began to collapse, she ran forward without hesitation, helping him drag out the last cow. When the fire finally died, the barn was gone, but no lives were lost. As dawn broke, the ranch lay blackened and silent. Clara stood beside Ethan, soot-streaked and trembling. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "All that work." Ethan turned to her, eyes burning with more than smoke. "You kept everyone alive. That's what matters." Then, without thinking, he took her hand. "Clara," he said quietly, "I've been fighting this land alone for too long. But you made me remember what it feels like to build again. Not just a ranch. A life." Her breath caught. "Ethan." He stepped closer. "I don't have much. Maybe never will. But if you'd stay, if you'd let me try, I swear I'd spend the rest of my days making sure you and those children never go hungry again." Tears welled in her eyes as she smiled through them. "You already did." And there, beneath the morning sun, with smoke rising behind them and ashes underfoot, Ethan kissed her, gentle, uncertain, but full of promise. Months later, the ranch was reborn. Neighbors, inspired by their story, came to help rebuild. The bank relented, moved by the community's faith. Rain finally returned that spring, washing away dust and sorrow alike. The fields turned green again, and laughter echoed through the valley. One evening, as fireflies glimmered across the grass, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch watching their children play, his hat on her lap, her hand resting over his. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" she teased softly. Ethan chuckled. "Used to think quiet meant peace. Now I know it just meant I was alone." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "And now?" He looked out over the land, the garden blooming, the barn standing tall again, and 6 children chasing the wind. "Now," he said, smiling, "it finally feels like home." Above them, thunder rolled gently, the promise of more rain to come, and the dry earth soaked up every drop like a prayer finally answered.